we're on the brink of World War III here. They want him to attack anything in NATO so they can claim that he's the aggressor. Europe is a basket case, and the choice they face is they need an external enemy, or you're looking at the people eventually rising up with pitchforks and going after the parliaments. Unfortunately, we got a panic cycle and international war next year in 2026. It doesn't look good. Just look at our national debt. And then they say, oh, de-dollarization, dollar's going to crash, this, all because of the debt. And what was the debt for? War. Endless wars. Right now, the real truth that the press isn't reporting is Ukraine is about ready to fall. NATO is now proposing to send in 250,000 troops, and it doesn't have to be part of NATO. They did this in Bosnia in 95 and Kosovo in 1999. Same shit all over again. History repeats because human nature does not change. They come up with the same solutions every time. They needed to borrow for the Civil War. They issued national bank currencies. They need to borrow for World War III. We issue stablecoins.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today is, of course, a returning guest, Martin Armstrong. Martin is behind Armstrong Economics as well as his Socrates model. Martin, thanks again for coming on the show today. How you doing?
Oh, it's interesting. Have a front row seat to watch the world melt down,
Just grabbing some popcorn and
watching who plays next. Just gets to be crazy anymore. Not sure if even it just, some of it just doesn't even make sense anymore. Like Trump's ultimatum, 50 days. I mean, in geopolitics, you cannot belittle someone who's at the same level as you, all right, publicly. What you say privately on a phone call is one thing, but you cannot do this publicly. You had Medvedev now come out and advising Putin that he should strike the West before the 50 days. This is the kind of stuff that goes on. It's this isn't, like negotiating a trade deal or something like that. This is much more serious. And, you're talking about giving an ultimatum, and what do you expect Putin to do? Oh my God, I'm afraid. I'll back down. I mean, come on. How long would he last as president doing something like that? And what's behind him, like Medvedev? They're neocons. Putin is the most reasonable guy that we could possibly ever hope for there. You remove him, and just look at what the former president said. He should, do a preemptive strike against the West before 50 days is up. It's Putin at least understands, and we're on the brink of World War III here. He has done, in all honesty, just about everything he could to sit on his hands. He draws a red line. Oh, don't give long-range missiles to Ukraine to attack inside Russia. They do. And everything he has said, this is our red line, they deliberately cross it. Why? Because they need war. They want him to attack anything in NATO so they can claim that he's the aggressor. But Europe is a basket case, and the choice they face is they need an external enemy, or you're looking at the people eventually rising up with pitchforks and going after the parliaments. Wars do not take place when everybody's fat and happy. There usually has to be some sort of an economic reason for it, unless you're talking about religion or philosophy. Like Khrushchev, saying, "We will bury you." That was philosophical. It wasn't economic. It's capitalism's evil, so communism is really the right way. Iran versus Israel, it's one God versus another. These are not economic issues, and they're not really solvable per se with a negotiation that's very easy. I'll give you this piece of land, you give me that, that sort of thing. So when you're into other types of war, as this is like with Ukraine, Putin can't back down. He's been made a fool of already. I mean, there was the Minsk agreement, and I couldn't believe it that that was the solution. If you look at Czechoslovakia, it split. Czech Republic versus Slovakia. Ukraine should have been done the same way. Yugoslavia broke up. Serbia versus Croatia, Armenians. There is just ethnic differences in these regions that go back centuries. And look, we handed a handful of jets to Greece, and they made the front pages with them saying, "Oh, now we can do a sneak attack on Turkey, another NATO country." But these hatreds, these ethnic hatreds, go back centuries. I mean, Greece and Turkey, you're talking about, it goes back to Alexander the Great. And so doing a 50-day thing like this, what do you really expect out of it? There was a peace deal. Boris Johnson hopped on the plane and told Zelensky he wasn't allowed to sign a peace. That made the front pages of the Ukrainian press. I speak to people in Ukraine. We had 2 employees there. And from Ukrainian people, what I hear is, are we allowed to even have peace without permission from London and Washington and Paris? This is pretty much this, the real problem we have here. There are these neocons that, I know people make up conspiracy theories all the time, but usually what's wrong with the conspiracy theories is they are giving these people way too much credit. They're not as smart as a lot of them, pretend. Look, I know Bill Kristol, whose father started the whole neocon movement. Bibi from Israel used to hang out with his family, went to school in Philadelphia also. They're all connected. All right. And I had arguments with Bill back in the 90s. And he was saying that, if we remove Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, we would bring peace to the Middle East. I said, you're out of your mind. They don't see themselves as Syrian, Iraqis. They see themselves as Sunni, Shiite, Kurd. That's why Yugoslavia broke up. Serbs, they don't get along with Armenians. This is really the problem. And they create these ideas, and you can look on YouTube. General Wesley Clark, after 9/11, he said he went to the Pentagon in a speech in 2007, and he was told they were going into Iraq, and he said, "Oh, so you connected, Saddam with 9/11?" They said, "No, we're just going in." And then, as he says in his speech, he was told right there and then that they were going to go into 7 other countries. And he said, since when does the military not defend the country but is engaged in overthrowing other governments? You know, I've spoken to a number of generals, the same story all the time. You know, these things are not, we have been engaged in endless wars, and that's the bulk of the national debt. Vietnam, you have Robert McNamara. His apology is also on YouTube before he died. And he said, sorry, 58,000 Americans died. We were wrong. We thought Russia was involved. It was just a civil war. They haven't been right about anything. Weapons of mass destruction never existed. They just make up this stuff. Ukraine, look, you had John McCain on the stage at Maidan telling him this is about you, not anybody else. You know, this is for your freedom, for your peace. Really? You know, they started the war in 2014. Victoria Nuland stuck in an interim government and told them to attack the Donbass. All right. We orchestrated the Civil War. You know, and she, you know, a tape of her got, you know, picked up. And when the EU was kind of, you know, objecting to what she was doing, the tape said F the EU. That all came out. The Biden administration had 3 people: Victoria Nuland, Garland, who started all the charges against Trump, and Blinken. All 3 claimed that their families were from that region, and all 3 claimed that their families were persecuted by Russians. How do 3 people from the same region end up in such high positions in the Biden administration? You know, what I see is more of a deliberate acts by people who have usurped American foreign policy for personal objectives. And it's not always that, oh, they make a bunch of money from war. It just seems to be also personal hatreds. You know, the neocons, the only thing I can express is that maybe from the 50s, when everybody had to hide underneath their desks in school, you know, air raids from Russia or whatever, they got mentally disturbed. I don't know. And they grew up, and it's always been Russia, Russia, Russia. And back in 99, I was asked to put in $10 billion into Hermitage Capital, which was an operation set up by Bill Browder and Eben Safra. And it was to take over Russia. And I said, my computer said Russia's going to collapse. Oh, no, don't worry about it. We got the shoe in. We're going to put in a President Baryshnovsky, and we'll control everything. I was told, put in $10 billion, I'll get 100 back. Because then they would take over Russia. All the gold, oil, diamonds, everything would go through the New York trading desks. And I said, I'm sorry, my computer says you're going to fail. They didn't like that. But that was the attempt to interfere in the Russian 2000 election. They blackmailed Yeltsin, got him to steal $7 billion from the IMF loans. They got him to wire the money through Bank of New York to a fake company in Geneva. And as soon as that wire took place, Eben Safra, basically went to the the Department of Justice and say, oh, Bank of New York just did a money laundering. So then they run into there and they threaten Yeltsin. If you don't step down and put in Boris Berezovsky, this is all going to come out that you stole $7 billion from the IMF. So what happens is the communists do hear about it. They filed a motion for impeachment. So now he's got the communists on one side, and he's got the Americans on the other side trying to do a regime change. That's how Putin got in. He turned to Putin, and that's why Putin had a 73% approval rating, because he wasn't a communist and he wasn't an oligarch like Berezovsky. And ever since it's been, that's why Hillary started the whole Russiagate, because they were behind it. And then when they asked, well, why would Putin interfere in the 2016 election? Oh, because I said one of their elections were rigged. No, it was basically what happened in 2000. Because I was in the middle of it and I know what the facts were. And Berezovsky even tried to call me to get me to put in the $10 billion. So this has always been about regime change. It's been this way for countless times. I know people that were on the investigation committee in Congress for the Benghazi, raid on the embassy. And when Hillary was questioned, well, why did they? Oh, what difference does it make? Why she wouldn't answer is because it was an arms operation. They were feeding arms into Syria to overthrow Assad, and at the same time, arms were being fed to the rebels to overthrow Gaddafi. This is what I was told a long time ago. It's in all honesty, whatever they attribute to Putin, they do themselves. And they basically say, well, he's going to do it, so I have to do it. It's kind of like going to a bar and say, well, I'm going to punch you in the face because I know you really want to hit me. And then you call it self-defense. But everything they do is always about regime change, getting more power. Yet they accuse Russia of doing the same thing. So I just see these people as purely evil. They've usurped American foreign policy. I was in D.C. when doing some work for the Reagan administration when Gorbachev made his speech and Reagan wanted to go see them. And I can tell you what the neocons were saying then. They couldn't call him a communist anymore. So they advised Reagan. They said, no, you shouldn't go. You can never trust a Russian. And Reagan wouldn't listen to him. He went. If he didn't go, the Berlin Wall would have never fallen. I can tell you what these neocons do. It's number one rule in their playbook is never talk to the enemy. If you don't talk to the enemy, then there can never be any peace. That's why if you look, you'll see every European leader, nobody will talk to Putin. When Trump did, oh, how dare he? Well, okay, so what's the alternative? Everybody just pushes the button? What? This is what you want? And when Putin comes out and says that, this is what you want, nuclear war. Oh, see, he's threatening. No, he's telling you, is this really where you want to go? He doesn't want to go there either. But, our press is on the payroll of these neocons. look at most of these stories. And what's the source? ISW, Institute for the Study of War. Who runs that? Victoria Nuland's sister-in-law. And it's always the same thing. Oh, Russia's weak. Russia's losing this. Russia's losing. To make it sound like we can walk in, take Russia, and nobody else is going to. All this nonsense. It's like we can defeat Russia. You had Kinzinger come out. Well, we can defeat Russia in 3 days. Really? And as if, we can nuke the whole country, take them out, and they will never get a nuke off to us. It's hard to explain these people, but they're deranged. And they said the same thing about Iraq. That's come out. Ex-CIA guy came out and said the same thing. Said he was told that they were going to go into Iraq. They would take it down within a week and move directly to Tehran. Oh, gee, didn't work out that way, did it? It's hard to explain, but I think these people they can't sleep at night without hating somebody. If Russia wasn't there, they'd pick somebody else. They don't seem to be interested in world peace at all. If you look at the national debt, it's all about war. Not socialism. Look at all the costs. We're still paying interest on debts from World War I because we never pay anything off. They're constantly rolled. Iraq, you spend $3 trillion on Iraq. That's going to cost us $10 trillion by the end of this century. It just goes on forever and ever and ever. And then you have bigger deficits. Oh, we need more money. Raise taxes on people. We're paying for all of this nonsense that is not really benefiting anybody. Even, Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, said there is no evidence of any country benefiting from endless wars. It's very true. Just look at our national debt. And then they say, oh, de-dollarization, dollar's going to crash, this. All because of the debt. And what was the debt for? War. Endless wars. Right now, the real truth that the press isn't reporting is Ukraine is about ready to fall. And there was a Ukraine Recovery Summit July 10th and 11th. They were committing $12 billion. NATO, all right, Ukraine can't join NATO. According to the rules, no country can join NATO while it is in war, because that would instantly bring everybody else in. So the Ukraine situation, NATO is now proposing to send in 250,000 troops. And it doesn't have to be part of NATO. They did this in Bosnia in 95 and Kosovo in 1999. NATO just went in. No treaty, nothing else. They have invested so much into this Ukrainian war that there's just no way they can accept a peace or allow Russia to win. What's the consequence of this? The answer if I was Putin, there's no way I would sign any kind of peace deal. I did that before. You had the Minsk agreement, and then you had Chancellor Merkel of Germany actually come out publicly. I couldn't believe that one. I don't know if she had too much to drink that day or what, but she actually came out and said, well, she was asked, why didn't you enforce the Minsk agreement? Oh, we never really intended to. We were just buying time for Ukraine to build an army to go to war with Russia. So this has all been deliberate. It's not, consequential or whatever. There was a peace deal. There was another peace deal. Boris Johnson hopped on the plane to make sure Zelensky didn't sign it. That made the front page of the Ukrainian press. So these aren't conspiracy theories. Ukrainians that I speak to have a right to ask, are we allowed to have peace without permission from London, Washington, and Paris? They're not in charge of their own country. Zelensky, you can look up when he won. CNN did a big piece on it. Oh, it was going to improve the relations. He ran on peace. Russia supported him. That's good. He wants to end the war. The death toll was 130,000 at the time. It's now approaching 1.5 million. So much for peace. 8 million have left. We had 2 employees in Ukraine. They're both now in Berlin. Nobody wants to even go back. So what are you going to rebuild? This is just a systemic ethnic hatred. So it's not something that seems to be negotiable. You have Zelensky outlawing the Russian language. So telling, the Russians that have been living there for hundreds of years in the Donbass and Crimea, you can't speak Russian anymore. What if the United States said, you can't speak Spanish anymore? Or Canada outlawed French? I think you'd have a civil war. Then Zelensky has outlawed their religion. Even the Pope came out against them on that. Outlawing, Orthodox Christianity and said, no, Christmas will be December 25th. The Pope said you can't do this to them. All because the patriarch of the Orthodox Church is in Moscow. It's like the French, captured the Vatican and brought the Pope to Avignon, These are not things that promote peace. They're deliberately antagonistic. So I'm concerned that you have Trump with this 50-day nonsense. Medvedev has come out and said that Putin should do a preemptive strike against the West now, while he can. What are you going to get out of this 50 days? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
So if I might ask you, Martin, obviously, Ukraine is at the is being more or less controlled by the Davos crowd, Bank of England, things of that nature. How would you define the existing power structure? How would you explain that to somebody, particularly the head of the snake, if you will?
Basically, that's NATO. When you understand government structures, once you create any kind of an agency, like Department of Education, AID, whatever, they will fight tooth and nail to stay alive. NATO should have been shut down when communism fell. That was their whole purpose. There was the Warsaw Pact versus NATO. Warsaw Pact gone. So why did NATO continue? I've seen the internal memos when all the money was going to to climate change. NATO was concerned that, and the memos basically said, how do we remain relevant? The only way they remain relevant is constantly saying, oh, Putin wants to invade and take Europe. It's the same MO that, from Khrushchev's days. All right. Problem is, Putin's not a communist. There is nothing there to take in Europe. When Japan went into Manchuria, it did so to get energy. All right. It was buying its energy from the United States, and we cut it off. All right. There has to be an economic benefit. All right. As I said, there's only two other exceptions: religion and philosophical. That's it. Anything else has got to be some sort of economic benefit. Even Alexander the Great couldn't go and say, well, we're going to go conquer this country, because the troops were shared in the spoils. And they said, oh, what are we going to get? Oh, nothing. I just want to conquer this country. They would have said, really? You're on your own. So there has to be some sort of benefit. And Europe has nothing. It gets its energy from Russia. And it has no gold. The best is, if Putin took Europe, he's going to get nothing but endless civil wars, civil unrest. The French are going to say, are you going to pay our pensions now? There's nothing there. Absolute nothing but headaches. I mean, it's not like, the days of empire building were based upon the French physiocrats. And they concluded what was wealth. And they said agriculture, land. That's what created the empire building. Oh, we got to conquer more and more of these places. The more land you have, supposedly that was wealth. That's what Adam Smith wrote his book as a Wealth of Nations, as a retort, basically against the physiocrats. That if I'm a blacksmith and I make a saddle and I sell it to somebody in France and I return with gold, the same thing as a farmer who sold wheat. So, Smith said, no, the wealth of a nation is everything, not just agriculture. But that's what created the whole, empire thing. Oh, the more land and countries we conquer, the wealthier we are. And it turned out to be a complete liability. France had a lot of Africa, lost it all. Britain the British Empire, the sun never set on the British Empire. Well, it did. None of these things last. So those days of empire building or conquer land for the sake of land is long gone. Nobody's really interested in that. China's not interested in occupying the United States. We're not interested in occupying China. What do you get out of it anymore? It's nothing. So we have these neocons that Russia has been attempted to be conquered at least 3 times by the West. Why? Because Russia does have something of value. They are considered the richest country in the world from a natural resource perspective. They have oil, they have diamonds, they have platinum, they have lumber, they have everything in excess that others don't. So that's why Napoleon, Hitler, they all tried going in. And most people don't realize, but in 1917, Russia had the largest gold reserves of any country in the world. As the Bolsheviks, the communists were rising, somebody hid them. And they have never been found to this day. People have been searching for him for a long time. Rumors where they buried him in some forest or they dropped him to the bottom of a deep lake. But many people have been trying to find him, but nobody has yet. But it just goes to show you the extent of wealth that Russia had. And that's why Hitler tried going in, Napoleon, the Swedes tried conquering it. That was with Peter the Great. So there's nothing in Europe to conquer. It's always the other way around. And the two things that I have heard, one is that, out of France, they call Macron the Petit Napoleon. And they really think, some of these people think if they can conquer Russia, get the 75 trillion in natural resource wealth, that's twice the size of the United States. And then they will rise again like the Roman Empire to rule the world. Others I've heard, they don't, to put it bluntly, they don't give a shit about Ukrainian people. If you did, you'd want peace. Like I said, when Zelensky went in, the death toll was only 130,000. Since Boris Johnson went in and interfered and stopped told them he wasn't allowed to have peace, another 500,000 Ukrainians have died. So, do they care? No. I know people that were in Romania. They overthrew the first election there. Why? Because NATO is building the biggest base in Europe to attack Russia in Romania. That's why they have interfered in their elections twice. This last election, I was told Macron was even there to make sure they won. They don't care about the Eastern Europeans at all. And what I've heard them say off camera, what the hell, they were all communists before anyhow. It's very derogatory towards them. As I said, the same thing with all this ethnic differences in the whole region. Former Chancellor of Germany, Bismarck, in 1888, came out and he said, Europe is going to be engulfed in a major war. And it's going to come from where? The Balkans. In 1914, the Serb basically assassinated the heir to the throne of Austria. 1914, right there in the Balkans. It was right. That's what I mean, is that this ethnic hatred is there for centuries. I don't see negotiation here. Ukrainians, they just hate Russians. We had a conference in Greece, and one of our employees from Kiev had to attend that. And when it came time to fly back to Ukraine, refused to take the quickest route because it stopped in Moscow. Wouldn't even take a connecting flight through Moscow. This is, if you brought a bottle of Russian vodka to dinner in Kiev, they'll smash it over your head. I mean, there's no solution to this any more than there is in the Middle East between Iran and Israel. So
speaking of,
it's just crazy.
Speaking of Iran and Israel and such, and as I continue to, have a better grasp of the geopolitical landscape out there, and you mentioned a lot of other points earlier. One of course being that Ukraine isn't really in control. Obviously their government isn't calling the shots, and NATO is and such. And there's also been talk that Some call the Zionists that they exert an extraordinary amount of control
Mhm.
there within the U.S. How valid do you think that is, or founded or unfounded? And perhaps you can kind of unpack things of that nature, Martin.
Now that is definitely founded. Like I say, what I'm a little disappointed in Trump about is that when he first went in, he got rid of John Bolton, Victoria Nuland, etc. It was against the neocons. I mean, I can tell you that I was in a meeting in Berlin before the election, and I said, look, our computer says Trump's going to win. It's going to be big time. And I said, oh, really? Every newspaper says he's going to lose. I said, I'm sorry. Our computer says he will win. And I said then, and I did write on the blog, I said, look, I know these neocons. I've been to dinner with these people. And I said, I can't imagine them allowing him to win. I said, I think they will try to assassinate him. And in Berlin, oh, come on. After that happened, they go, holy shit, you really know these people. I said, look, I've been to dinner with them. All right. Now, what's relevant from that to the Middle East is that, as I said, Bibi went to school in Philadelphia. He hung out with Crystal's family. And it was Crystal's father, Irving, who started the whole neocon movement. All right. Bibi is a die-hard neocon. They used him to get into Trump. So Trump, I think, wrongly assumed, oh, he's a head of a state, and treated him differently than he would have Victoria Nuland or John Bolton. He's even made jokes about Bolton. If I'd send him into a meeting, everybody would get scared because they knew he would nuke everybody. Bibi basically, I think, got him to go along with this whole thing against Iran. Trump at least told him, don't take out the Ayatollah. They seemed to stop there. But what did they do? They deliberately targeted the high-ranking people. It was regime change. That was the objective. It's always this regime change shit. And the problem that you're dealing with here is that is religious. In the case of Iran, you take out the Ayatollah, it's not just Iran. All right, about on average 30% Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. are all Shiite. This would be like a Protestant assassinating the Pope. Let's or what Zelensky's doing. You can't worship Orthodox Christian because the patriarch happens to be in Moscow. It's the same shit. So unfortunately, with Israel, there are a lot of Zionists there who do believe in this stuff. You also have evangelicals over there. And there are definitely people trying to bring about the second coming, end of the world, etc. They really think this. I am concerned about that. And one of the things that they definitely want to do is basically blow up the Dome of the Rock. I know a lot of people may not know what that is. I mean, I've been there. There is, a big rock in the middle of that mosque. That's where the temple was for the Jews, and on this rock, they basically say that's where Abraham took his son to be sacrificed. Islam says, no, no, no. This same rock is where from Muhammad ascended to heaven from. Anybody that's been to the Middle East, every single place, no, no, this happened here, not that. The same exact thing. Again, so I mean, I don't see how there's negotiation for that. Okay, you got this rock. Jews say that's where Isaac was. No, that's where. How do you resolve that? There's no solution. It's whoever has possession at the current time. And so that's what these prophecies and people are trying to deliberately make them happen. I don't know if that makes it legitimate or not, but they want to destroy the dome of the rock and rebuild the temple, and they think that will be to the Jews the Messiah will come, to the Christians this is the second coming, but they all seem to be on the same agenda in that sense. But you have people deliberately trying to do this.
It seems like almost kind of like creating like a false flag event, and also, if I might add to that, I have heard some people speculate that October 7th was either allowed to happen, or there were forces or some entity that intentionally made it happen so as to serve as a pretext. What are your thoughts on that?
Our computer picked it up. All the defense stocks started moving a week in advance. Look, when I designed this computer, I was just a trader. I had no inkling or desire to forecast war, geopolitics. That wasn't something, he asked me if I was in high school, would you want to be doing this? I would say, what are you, crazy? We had a client in Lebanon, the central bank there, and we more or less became famous for forecasting currency. It really started, Bretton Woods collapsed in 71. Currencies first started trading in 72. I think because my father had taken the family in 1964 to Europe for the summer, I learned about currencies. Every border you had to change, you had to change currencies back then. And I happened to have a client who was an executive VP at Franklin National Bank. And that bank was the first bank to fail after Bretton Woods. It was a big one. It was one of the 20th, I think it was the 20th largest bank in the country. It's the bank that started MasterCard. So he called me in. He says, I think we got this problem, with currency or something. You wouldn't understand this. Would you come take a look at it? So I went and looked. The bank basically went belly up on a 10% move in the Italian lira. So after that, just about every foreign exchange crisis, it was like, get the guy that did that one. Because they didn't teach any of this stuff in school. Only taught, and they still are just teaching, Keynesian economics, all from the fixed rate exchange period. And I did have lunch with one of the top 5 universities in the world, basically. I was asked to go to lunch, and I went to lunch with them, and they asked me if I would teach there. And I said, excuse me? I said, I'm not really interested in teaching. But I asked them, why are you asking me? And they said they know what they teach doesn't work. I said, well, that's the first step, But they also said that, look, anybody that really has learned all this stuff from the free markets, hedge fund managers or whatever. Nobody wants to go back. I said, well, who wants to go back and teach a room of 30 kids, you know? But, you know, so we had this client in Lebanon, and they knew we were big in currency, etc. So they asked if we could build a model on the Lebanese pound. We did, and what came out was, like it said, the country was going to fall apart in 8 days. I thought the data was wrong. I called the client. I said, look, something's got to be wrong with this data. And very calmly, he asked, well, what currency does it recommend? And I thought that was a strange response. I said, a Swiss franc. 8 days later, that's when the war began. So clearly they called me, not for that forecast, for the timing. They already saw the money moving. All right. Somebody always knows in advance. You know, I had a client in Saudi Arabia who was one of the biggest shippers in the Gulf. And he calls and says, Iraq's going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf tomorrow. What do you think gold's going to do? I said, you tell me a war's going to start tomorrow? Yeah. What do you think gold's going to do? So by 1998, you know, I had stood up in London and I said, look, our computer says Russia's going to collapse, and I give it a little more than 30 days. That was the long-term capital management crisis, Russian default on bonds, etc. By then I had learned, whenever there's a war, somebody always knows in advance, and the money begins to move. The SEC used our stuff after 9/11, looking for who bought puts on the airlines a few days in advance. October 7th, we saw all the same thing. All the defense stocks started moving in advance. Somebody knew. It doesn't tell me who. It just tells me, hey, something's going to happen here. And so October 7th, personally, I believe that they knew, they let it happen, the same as 9/11. All right, I can tell you that the people from the First World Trade Center had drawn the Twin Towers on the walls of their cells with planes going into them in advance of 9/11. The BOP came down, took pictures, all that kind of stuff. And when they formed Homeland Security, all they said publicly was, well, some agencies had information in advance but didn't share it. So they knew what was happening. I mean, come on. Jets were told to stand down. Why? Because they get more power from it. You know, we now have to take off our shoes. You know, they got the Patriot Act. You can't wire more than $3,000 to an individual. Oh, it might be terrorism. You know, we are so monitored for everything, all because of that. They get power. So, October 7th, I believe Israel knew. They allowed it to happen the same way as we allowed 9/11 to happen. They get more power out of it. That's always the way that this shit happens. And look, you can look on Wikipedia. All right, Project Northwoods. The CIA proposed killing Americans, blaming it on Cuba to justify an invasion. JFK refused. The documents are showing the CIA took out JFK. There was one I published, and after, you know, one of the guys told his family in New Jersey that a clique in the CIA had taken out JFK. and he said he was afraid for his life. He was found dead, shot to death a couple weeks later. JFK wanted to shut down the CIA because of that stuff. They set Nixon up. Nixon basically, there's a tape. He had the head of the CIA in his office, and he said, "I know who killed JFK." That's all he said. All right. Who gets caught in Watergate? Ex-CIA guys. Come on, I think a couple guys from the hood could have done a better job. I happen to have bumped into Richard Nixon after he left office on the beach in New Jersey. I was shocked because he wasn't surrounded by Secret Service. I was like, "You really, Richard Nixon?" Lo and behold, you can Google it. After Richard Nixon left office, he refused Secret Service protection. Why? He didn't trust them. It wasn't to save government money. Even with the assassination attempt on Trump, he was denied sniper protection up to that day. Same thing as Oswald. They killed a guy. Oh, shoot him in the head. Then he can't talk. Who put you up to this? People I talk to in Washington, they say that they know that other people were involved. Will that ever come out, like the JFK stuff? Maybe if I live to 200, it might.
So it seems like a lot of these alphabet agencies, there's an insidious nature to them, and they're a threat and have been a threat to our well-being.
Look, they see themselves as the saviors. Oh, you don't understand, and this is what these neocons. It's like, oh, well, fine. Khrushchev said, "We will bury you." So they ended up getting their backs up, and we're going to spread democracy to the world. And like I said, I argued with Crystal back then. I said, Middle East doesn't want democracy. All right? This is all tribal. We drew the borders. We broke up the Ottoman Empire after World War I. We drew these borders. We even put in these dictators. And it required dictators because, look, what happened? As soon as you took out Saddam Hussein, you can look at Tony Blair's apology also on YouTube. He said, "We thought we were freeing the people. We didn't realize we were subjecting them to more sectarian violence." These dictators were honestly necessary to keep all these tribes from fighting each other. You can't put them all into one country, and this is it, and you all got to get along. They're just completely different. Sunni basically believe, you can have a king to run the state. Shiite, no, the church should run the state. Those are kind of the issues from the Protestant Reformation period. So you see, there are philosophical differences, ethnic differences. We should stop judging everybody by ourselves. America, I had watched a documentary, FDR, he went to Boston trying to get us into World War II, and it took Pearl Harbor to do it. But he went to Boston trying to justify sending troops over. Boston were all Irish, and they objected. That's why the U.S. could never get in. And they said, "You really expect us to go defend the British after what they did to the Irish?" That's why America was always isolationist. The people that came here to get away from that shit. When they were forming the euro, they came to me. I told them, I said, you don't understand what made America great. They said, what? I said, it was discrimination. Oh, how could you say that? I said, because it was fair. Whoever was the last off the boat was discriminated against. When they spoke English, they could get a job. And then you look at the next generation, you ask an American, what are you? I'm half Irish, half German. I said, you don't see that here. The language keeps everybody separate. Once everybody spoke the same language, they intermarried, we ended up with a different unified culture.
It is very interesting with how society is and such. And to your point, everybody's been discriminated against at some point, and everyone has blood on their hands. You hear about different groups. Well, this person did this, or we need to do reparations, or we need to do that. I mean, everybody's literally has blood on their hands. That would, as someone like you who enjoys reading history, and it is striking. And you mentioned about what's gone on over in the British Isles. I had on John Waters, who, if you're not familiar, is a prominent Irish talker writer, and I was shocked by how much he resonated with so many people. Wanted to get your thoughts real quick as it relates to much of the civil strife that we hear a lot about, not just here in the U.S., but also overseas, particularly over in Europe. Could you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, this was more caused by the migrant crisis, which was worse in Europe than in the United States, mainly because the people they let in were primarily Muslim from North Africa. And so, again, you're looking at different religions. So there has been, they did not assimilate into society. You go to Sweden, and there's some places they got signs up, Sharia law here. The police admit they don't go into certain areas. This is, it completely different from what we experience here with the illegal aliens. Most, were the same, religious basis. Most are not really Mexicans, but Mexicans are probably the hardest working group and more family oriented than most of the others. And then you had places that they were trying to make jokes out of it, but it was true. I mean, they eat cats and dogs. They do that in Asia. Hate to tell you, but you listen, we call it chicken chow mein. Chow is dog in Chinese. So we added chicken. It's not dog, but we still call it chow mein. All right. Eat cats in Korea. I mean, look, this is what they do. What do you want me to say? That's their culture. But Europe has a serious problem, and it's not because the religious ethnicity is so different. They're not assimilating. It came out there were over 1,000 girls in Germany that were raped on New Year's Eve to hide the fact that the decision to let these people in, so they don't get blamed. They tell the police, don't call it rape, they call it assault. But look, anybody that's been to the Middle East, if I took a girl with me there, she can't leave the hotel in Saudi Arabia without me. All right, she's got to wear a scarf. You can't go there in a mini skirt, and a halter top. Just not going to be acceptable. I'm in Florida. You still see girls walking around in bikinis with a shirt top on, going across to the store or something. That would not be acceptable in the Middle East. It's just not. So Germany even put out a book, and on the cover of it was like a girl's butt and like "do not touch," trying to inform these people of how to act. But they were raised in a different environment. Women in burqas, it was like, okay, you should put something on so I'm not tempted, instead of the other way around. But this is the problem, and you're looking at a lot of civil unrest throughout Europe, and that's one of my concerns about the Middle East, that they don't appreciate. You go after Iran, if you took out the Ayatollah or whatever, you're going to have sleeper cells all over the place. So you're not talking about just a Middle Eastern conflict anymore. You're talking about civil unrest throughout Europe. Be careful of all the major cities. And we had a conference over there last year, and I have to tell all the girls, do not walk around by yourself. All right, and that's in London. It's just the way it is. It's the movie Taken, and girls are being kidnapped over there. Simple as that. It's
Speaking of, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just saying that we don't have that situation here in America.
You mentioned obviously about women and obviously kids being taken just in general. Wanted to get your thoughts on that element of what's going on in the world, and then well, I guess I'll ask you that question. What are your thoughts on that? I hear a lot about obviously in line with this Epstein situation that's going on, that you have these certain elites, call it pedo elites, that are trafficking people, so on and so forth. Could you shed some light on that?
I think a lot of that is more of a conspiracy theory that is blocking the real issue here. I was warned in Wall Street, back in the 90s, if not the 80s, be careful, they will try to use women to get into you. This is standard. And look, if Epstein was really into young girls, maybe you do that with some friends at the local bar. You don't be calling up the Prince of England, Bill Clinton and stuff like that. It was the largest blackmail operation probably in history, and that's their problem. It's not a list of pedophiles. And look, I don't think you or I would be able to tell the difference between an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old. We're not talking about 6-year-old kids here. And the other thing that's very strange, where Epstein's island is 50 miles the other way, is the British Virgin Islands. The legal age in Britain is 16, not 18. So you're bringing in 17-year-old girls. Why don't you take the island on the other side? It's perfectly legal then. All right. obviously this is a blackmail situation. And I think this is the problem with any of this information coming out. It's not, oh, we have to prosecute these people as they're pedophiles. I think you better pick up the rug a little bit. Since they're high-profile people, it's like, look, I was told by Congress a long time ago, all right, why was J. Edgar Hoover feared? He had FBI would investigate every politician, and he'd have a file on them. And he would walk into the office, and I was told this by congressmen, gee, our guys found this out on you. We're going to keep it safe, so make sure your opponent doesn't get it. You got them on a leash now. Oh, thank you very much. What can I do for you? All right. This is Epstein. All right. The real questions are, one, who was paying him to do this? Was it CIA? Mossad? He's doing this for somebody else. Not for personal, there's no economic evidence that he was benefiting directly by it. All right. Secondly, people that may have been there were blackmailed. And then the question becomes, what did they do for this? Does that lead to another spider's web that goes off in every other which direction? I think it's a lot more complicated than people realize. And it can become geopolitical as well. Personally, I believe Bill Gates' involvement, probably for the same thing. I think it was largely that, can you get something on this guy so he does what I want him to do? That's what I believe. Do I have evidence of that? No, I don't know what Bill Gates and Epstein actually did, but it's very strange. I do know the way they operate with this stuff to begin with. Goldman Sachs was, I believe, feeding information to Elliot Spritzer, who was the prosecutor in New York. He took down Hank Greenberg, who was the head of AIG. Why? Because Greenberg, AIG, under his reign, refused to issue the mortgage-backed security insurance. So they couldn't sell CDOs. All of a sudden, Elliot Spritzer goes after AIG. Our requirement is he steps down. He is forced to step down. AIG suddenly insures all the stuff that Goldman wanted to issue. And you get the 2008-2009 crash. Elliot Spritzer was a pawn. He now thought he was king of the mountain. He took down the head of AIG. He then, I'm going to clean up Wall Street. What happens? Oh, look at these checks. You were paying a hooker. All of a sudden that comes out. He has to step down. Look, like I said, I was warned a long time ago. Be careful. They will always use women to get into you. I had spoken to an attorney. The courts in New York, I was told they hire so-called paralegals to sleep with the prosecution to get information. The prosecution hires paralegals to sleep with the other side to get information. And the court in New York pays for all this shit. And I swear to God, I was told by a New York lawyer in one of those cases, that's what goes on. I mean, you just can't make up this stuff. So Epstein, I think it's a lot deeper than people suspect. And I think the pedophile nonsense is the cover. So you don't see where this thing really leads. Because I think it goes straight into intelligence communities and everything else. And who was paying for it?
Unbelievable. Wanted to also, you mentioned about, Bill Gates and his ties with Epstein, things of that nature. There's a purported list that was curated. I think his name is Ryan Dawes or Doss. I might be getting it off, but that was curated from court records and things of that nature. And Clinton was another person that was mentioned on there. You hear a lot of stuff about the Clintons in general. What are your thoughts as it relates to what has been? Let me rephrase that. People having accused the Clintons of being involved in stuff like this and other nefarious activities, to include taking people out. Do you think a lot of that is more or less founded or unfounded? I'm just curious. I hear a lot about this.
No, I mean, I do. I wouldn't put anything past the Clintons. I do think that they delve in the dark side a little bit. As I say, I was in the middle of the attempted regime change back in 2000. And so I know what was going on there. I think one of the girls, I don't remember her name, that was in this Epstein thing, who had done a deposition or testified to some degree, and she said that Epstein had told her that Clinton owes her or owes him. So, look, I think that's the same thing. It's like, what can you get on this guy or that guy or whatever? Just welcome to Washington. What do you want me to say? It's not, the deep state is a lot deeper than people realize. It's so friggin' deep that we are the enemy, period. And if you think that they give two shits about us, they don't. I mean, look at all these wars. They don't care. They don't care about the people that die on the battlefield. They don't care about the collateral damage. World War II was supposedly around 75 to 80 million people died. Only 20 million to 25 million at best were military. The rest is all, collateral damage. So, in the Middle East, the Hamas was sticking, military assets in hospitals and stuff like that. Oh, they killed all these people in the hospital. Saddam Hussein was we did that. All right, just look up the Lusitania. We were using the Lusitania, private passenger ships, to ship secret arms to Britain when we're supposed to be neutral. The Germans said, oh, there were arms in there. U.S., oh, we would never do something like that. 1987, Archaeological Magazine, look it up. They discovered the Lusitania. The government suddenly came out, be careful, there's arms, there's ammunition in the hull. They lie about everything. There isn't anything that they have ever told the truth about, period, that I could find. If they say the sky is blue, it's probably red. I mean, as simple as that. I mean, it's, you look at prosecutors, they don't give a shit about the Constitution. They argue to win, period. They don't care. Have you ever seen a prosecutor? Oh, Yes, we violated the Constitution. We'll dismiss this. No, of course, got to do it. We'll go right to the end. They don't honor the Constitution. They don't honor their oath. Nothing. We win. Period. That's why many people, they say justice is spelled in two words, just us. And Thrasymachus, you can read in Plato, he had a debate with Socrates 2,500 years ago. And he said, justice is the same regardless of the form of government. Monarchy, democracy, aristocrat, whatever, dictatorship. It's always the self-interest of those in power. He's been proven correct forever. Nothing ever changes. You had John Stuart Mills. He wrote a book on liberty. It's one of my favorite quotes. He said, we have yet to free ourselves from the stain of legal persecution. That's what they did to Trump. They did that to Debs to try and prevent him from becoming president. I mean, they used the law about all this stuff. There was, there was a big march in 1893. It was called Coxley's Army. All right. Arguing, for basically most of the things that they asked for is what FDR did in the Great Depression. But one of the guys who was part of that march on Washington ended up writing The Wizard of Oz. All right. They got there. How did they break it up? They arrested Coxley. Oh, not for free speech. He walked on the grass. So they locked him up for walking on the grass. And, he wrote the book, The Wizard of Oz. We're off to see the wizard, which was Congress. The Scarecrow was agriculture. The Tin Man was in, basically industry, industrial. The Lion was supposed to be William Jennings Bryan. And we're following the yellow brick road. That was the gold standard. It was a very good satire, and it turned it by 1937. They turned it into a child's movie. But what was it about? It was about a protest from 1893, Coxley's Army marching on Washington. History always has an interesting little twist to it.
Wow. So it seems you can't trust anything that, or I should say, you should, the average person should certainly be very mindful of the information that's being put out there. And wow.
When they started the income tax to get that through, we're only going to tax the rich. You'll never have to pay. Okay? Then World War II comes. Payroll tax. How about that? All right. Now most people pay more in Social Security than they do in income tax. Money they'll never get to see. I debated Steve Forbes, who was for the flat tax, and the governor of New Jersey at the time, Jim Florio, who basically was tax it if it moves, and if it dies, take the rest. And I blew him out of the water. I said, you borrow from the poor, and you don't even have the decency to pay them interest on the money you're borrowing. And so you hand them you overtax them, then you give them their refund check to pretend you're magnanimous. I just stole $100 from you, but here, I'll give you 80 back. Doesn't that make me a great guy? I said, do you pay them interest on their refunds that they get at the end of the year? I said, you're borrowing from the poor, the very poor you pretend to care so much about, and you don't even pay them interest. They don't know what to say after that.
Wow. So what's next as it relates to where we are right now? What should we be paying attention to right now at this present time, Martin?
I am concerned about this theatrical nonsense of Trump with his 50-day shit. Not that he said it, but it dovetails into when our computer is saying the geopolitical stuff is rising from August right into September, which would be his 50 days. So you got Medvedev basically telling Putin he should, do a preemptive strike. That's probably, I don't think Putin would do that. The only way I see that this could possibly work would be to reverse the regime change tactics on the West. What Putin should do is say either Zelensky steps down and holds elections within 31 days. Let the Ukrainian people decide. And honor the Minsk agreement, which you agreed to, and everybody swore to allow the Donbass to vote. All right? If you refuse to do that, I would give the Ukrainian people 2 weeks to get out of Kiev and then say, I'm going to nuke it. So that nobody will be there again. NATO would probably then say, you do that, we'll attack Moscow. And I would say, okay, very fine. Let's go. And I have targeted every capital of Europe. If Trump tried to interfere, I would say, I'm going to target Washington, New York, Chicago, and LA. Now what? If that doesn't get people off their damn ass to stop these neocons and overthrow these leaders, nothing will. I mean, I just feel as if he's got to do something like that to be taken seriously, to the where the average person says, no, I don't want to go to war. I think they're just kind of like walking around in la la land, yeah, whatever they say, who knows. And these people are insane. But I don't know what else to do. I mean, I think the Ukrainians I speak to, as I've said, their response is, are we allowed to have peace without permission from Washington, London, and Paris? Zelensky does not represent the people. He's kidnapping people off the streets, sending them to the front lines. There are videos out there of people with Down syndrome. I mean, come on. NATO wants to send in troops because they're running out of people. So what are you now fighting for? A vacant lot? Ukrainians are dead? So you're not trying to save the people. Knock off the bullshit. That's why Romania was voting against, they voted for the guy that was against building NATO plants and shit like that in Romania, because they know they're expected to go to war against Russia, and they don't want it either. These wars do not benefit those people. You're going to lose everything. Your future, if you don't lose your family. What does a soldier, what's the best he can get out of it? Is to come back in one piece, right? That's it. That's all he gets out of it. He doesn't. This isn't Alexander the Great where he shares in the spoils. So I don't know. I just think that something's got to give here. Trump's 50-day nonsense is, and what are you going to do? He's threatened 100% tariffs on Russia and everybody that supports him. So that's China, India, So now you're going to completely divide the entire world economy. And you think that's going to make them say, oh, okay, I'll bend the knee. I'll do whatever the U.S. tells me to do. Not going to happen. This is what BRICS is about. When they took, when Biden had it, Russia removed from SWIFT, and then Blinken threatened China. If you help Russia, we'll do the same to you. And they go, oh, really? So I'll put it this way. They just pushing through the Genius Act. Why? Let's pick up the rug there. China owned 10% of the U.S. national debt. Since they've been threatened, they've been dumping debt all the time. Japan's been dumping because it needs it. All right. Europe, they need the money. A government fails when it cannot sell the new debt to pay off the old because we're in this Ponzi scheme. What's the solution? If you've threatened everybody in the world and nobody's going to buy your debt, you need new buyers. The Genius Act is to create staple coins required backing by U.S. Treasuries. It's another market to sell debt. That's it. You got the Bitcoin people. Oh, see, this is great. Shows big. Sorry, you better take a look. They sold you this Bitcoin story. Oh, it's separate from central banks. It won't be inflationary. All this bullshit. Staple coins backed by U.S. Treasury. Thank you very much. Just replacing China. You scared the hell out of everybody else from buying. You need new buyers. I know a couple people who voted against it because in there is also loosely worded legislation that would basically allow CBDCs, which Trump said no. This is the same model they did with COVID. The First Amendment says the government shall not. They can pick up the phone, tell YouTube, Facebook, cancel this guy. Government can't do it. They can. All right, so you create private staple coins. All the banks can create them, backed by treasuries. I'm going to do a report. It'll be on Monday. This is nothing new. This is how they funded the Civil War. In 1863, they issued national bank currency. They told the banks, you buy our debt and will allow you to issue currency up to the face value of the debt you hold. The staple coin. All over again. You want to buy them? You can still buy them. Collectors collect them. They're from 1863. Same shit all over again. History repeats because human nature does not change. They come up with the same solutions every time. They needed to borrow for the Civil War. They issued national bank currencies. They need to borrow for World War III. We issue staple coins.
Well, I guess WWIII, here we are.
Oh, pretty much. They don't, you know. So I said, if Putin did something like that, maybe you got a shot. But look, I've argued against all this stuff. I can't defeat my own computer. It's always been right. Unfortunately, we got a panic cycle and international war next year in 2026. It doesn't look good.
An international war next year.
And things start, ironically, our computer's been projecting from August on, it's going to start increasing in tensions. And then you have Trump coming out with this 50-day nonsense. Right in time. And Ukraine looks like it's about ready to fall. So NATO is looking at using Kosovo as the example. We can send troops in. And they called it humanitarian. So they're bombing Serbia. For him to save lives, we'll kill a bunch.
Unbelievable. You know, I think about some of the people I know. I don't do a good job of keeping in touch with everybody, but people I was in the military with. I was a corpsman in the Navy, and some of those folks who are with the Marines in different units, and I think about, wow, like them getting sucked into that. I got out like 6 years ago or so. Thankful for that, and I also think about you mentioned about, you know, what does the average person stand to gain who gets sucked into this, so to speak, and you're right, and I think about even people that I've known, you know, Martin, I have had there have been at least 4 people that were in my class. I was in a special warfare class, did not work out for me, hence I became a corpsman, but presumably all from suicide. And then there's been a number of people that when I was at my last duty station, where they just deaths. It was COVID, or it was, you know, this thing or that thing. I had a lieutenant that I worked under who took his life. I didn't hear about that until a couple years back. But you think about all the other ripple implications and what it does. And, you know, I mentioned, I think the first time I had you on my podcast, gal down the street from me, literally 2 sons dead from Clovis, California.
Mm-hmm.
Third one was recalled. It was like something out of Saving Private Ryan. Like I just, so yeah, I become very, very pro peace. And, I just, I feel like you know, feel like I got bamboozled.
Look, I have a fellow that works for me who was in Vietnam, and then he's seen everything that's come out. You know, Johnson, we were never attacked in Tonkin Gulf. Tapes of Johnson saying, for all I know, they were shooting at whales that night. Then you have Robert McNamara saying they took us into Vietnam because they thought Russia was involved. And he says, sorry, we were wrong. It was just a civil war. Look, when you judge people by yourself, that's the problem. And I was told, like, from World War II, when they caught Arabs that were helping the Nazis in North Africa, and they would, you know, Brits would torture them, tell us where they're at, and they would never speak. And the guy said, okay, fine, get the biggest pig. Bring the pig in. See the pig? I'm going to kill the pig. If you don't tell me what I want to hear, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to bury you in the pig skin, and you're never going to see Allah. So they never had to touch anybody. You fight by what they think, not what you think. And if that's what they believe, that's what you have to do. I mean, and this is what war is about. Churchill even said, the most precious thing in war is truth, and it needs a bodyguard of lies to protect it. They lie about everything. what are they supposed to say? Oh, look, we want to take out Sodom because we just want to. Do you go? Oh, he's torturing his people. Oh, he's doing this. Obama tried that with Assad, and it was rejected. Oh, he's killing his people. We have to go in there for humanitarian reasons. NATO went into Kosovo. Oh, for humanitarian reasons. So you kill a bunch of people, and then for humanitarian reasons, right? You're not interested in peace. I don't know what it is with these people. It just maybe they were the delinquents when we were in high school that always wanted to fight with somebody, and they just, because that was their motive, they always rose to power to be able to do that to the world, I guess. I don't know. But like I said, you had 3 people in the Biden administration all claiming their families were attacked by Russians or persecuted by Russians. Garland, Blinken, and Victoria Nuland. How could 3 from the same region end up in one administration? They had to weasel their way in for personal reasons. Then her sister-in-law's in there running the Institute for the Study of War. Constantly saying, oh, Russia's lost this, Russia's weak, Russia's that, to make it sound like we can go in there, no problem. Nobody's going to be killed on our side. We'll just kill all the Russians. Same bullshit all the time.
It's really sad how many people, Russians here in the U.S. and such, and even other parts, how they've had no part of this, but especially when the war first started, they were discriminated against and such. And I just want to comment. I think about as a millennial, think about the current society that I observe and try and make sense of, okay, well, what happened? And it seems like a lot of the stuff that transfolded was a product of the 60s and such. And I say that because I feel like, and I'm not some like Putin sympathizer, but I totally understand where they're coming from. I feel like, Russian society, even other parts of Eastern Europe, are more, in terms of the family-centric values, family values are more where we all need to be collectively. Then you look at the West and families like just completely, like I had people, and I know I'm getting all personal now, but I had people like, why aren't you dating, or why aren't you doing this or that? And I look at a lot of people I've had conversations with 20, 30 years older than me, people who've gone down the gambit, so to speak, and how they get wrecked, whether it's financially or this otherwise. And it is fascinating how a lot of it all comes down to the economics, how that's played a role, and then Johnson's Great Society and this and that, and how it's so in mesh, it's all intertwined, and then how you look at the younger generations and how they are going to have to end up figuring this out more or less.
Well, in all honesty, that's what FDR created with his socialistic agenda. It altered the family structure. And what I mean is this: if you wanted to marry some girl, 1910 or whatever, typically you were at least 50% older, maybe even twice the age. Why? Because you first had to get the house, the farm, the chickens, then go to her father and say, I want to marry your daughter. What do you got? Okay? Because there was no social welfare and things of this nature. So you had to first prove yourself that you could take care of a family. And you had a bunch of kids, largely because that was your retirement. They took care of the parents, okay? Social Security came around, and it was like, do kids save for their parents today? No. All the stats show that are in their 30s are still living at home. So the family structure has changed. It's it the social contract has completely been altered. Um, and I knew somebody, a big producer in Hollywood, and I asked him. I said, "How come all the movies always end up, you know, happily ever after and all this stuff?" He says, "People don't want to go to movies and leave crying." So they always create fictional things. Oh, I got married. That's it. And I think I saw a Match.com poll or something, and it said 70% of the people think that, or was women, or I think it was women. I don't remember, but it said that 70% of them thought that love at first sight. Really, it's interesting, but I think it's all created in the movies. Fictional, things. Oh, there she is. How do you know she even speaks English? um, so things have changed a lot, and I see the social structural changes, and that's what we were talking about with Europe. I talked to friends in Germany. They have like a 13-year-old daughter. They will not even allow her to walk 2 blocks to the bus stop anymore. Um, you know, um, I knew a German. I knew a Russian who was a translator in Japan, Japanese to to Russian, and she went back. I talked to her every once in a while. She went back to take care of her parents in Moscow, and asked me a question: why does everybody hate us so much? How do you answer that? She's not political, not involved in any of that stuff. But from her take, why does everybody hate us so much? Hey, what am I supposed to say? Because you're Russian? So that's racism? You talk about racism and, oh, that's hate speech, that's 20 years in jail, but it's okay if it's a Russian? You got, Lindsey Graham on tape with Zelensky saying this is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians. Could you say that about blacks? Or Islam? That would be hate speech, wouldn't it?
I think about people who, I've heard people say, kill as many Russians as you can, things of that nature, and I think about, that's someone's loved one, and not to get all cheesy and corny, but I think when people are able to remove the humanity from people, it's a lot easier, obviously, to take a
Yeah.
life and such. But of course, I think about how, yeah, that's somebody's future. They've been, either oppressed into service, and that's someone's loved one. And I think about if I lost, a loved one to something like that, and how, yeah, I think you have some very insidious characters in positions of power. And I'm also reminded, Martin, that not everybody, not like I'm some saint or something, but not everyone's like us in terms of the sanctity of human life. And yeah, to your point, we're seen as instruments or pawns or a means to accomplish an objective. And then what does Napoleon say? A soldier will do so much for a little bit of ribbon. That's what it reminds me of.
Well, there's also cultural differences. For example, looking at the rule of law in Athens, what it was that the only crime against the state could punish you for, like they did Socrates, was a crime against the gods, or if you actually stole something from the government. If you and I had a fight, and I killed you, or whatever, then your family has to prosecute me. It wasn't like a state crime. And it evolved to the point that kind of like the Hatfield McCoys. So if I killed somebody in your family, you couldn't get to me. It's okay. You could kill somebody else in my family. And so that's why that attitude has prevailed in the Balkans. Um, so the most feared, really, mafia is not Italian and it's not Russian. It's Armenian. Why? Because they have that. A Russian or Italian, if we did something, they kill us. End of it. Okay? So Armenians, they take that old culture, okay, and take out you, the family, and the dog. Why? That prevents any future retaliation. Okay, so again, it's part of that culture in that whole Balkans area. And I mean, I've been all over the world, so I've studied the different cultures and how I'm interested in how people think because they will respond according to how they think. And when you understand it, then you can see, okay, this is a different thing altogether. Our rule of law is all based on corruption. The king of England they were fine people that were called immersements. And the joke was there was hardly a man in England who hadn't been immersed once or twice a year. That's how he made money. So he had Magna Carta. Okay, what did Magna Carta do? Trial by jury. So the jury was going to decide what the fine would be, not the king anymore. And so then Magna Carta really took the revenue power of the king away. So what happened? If you and I had a fight beforehand, okay, again, that was private. Now Magna Carta comes. You and I have a fight. We disturb the king's peace. He interferes in the case. We get fined, prosecuted, whatever. So we have followed that law. So murder is now a state crime. It's not, the family doesn't prosecute you. The state does. That all comes from that corruption of the king needing money. So he interfered in every little dispute. You disturbed my peace, so I'm a victim now. Because you and I had a fight. So corruption has been there for a long time. And that's why I said, John Stuart Mill's, his book on liberty, we have yet to free ourselves from legal persecution. The king went after everything for money. You cross the street, that's a $20 fine. It's all money. To this day, what have they done to the police? They've turned them into IRS agents on wheels. Oh, you're doing 65 and a 55. Really? The 55, first of all, was installed 1973 because of OPEC to save fuel, not for safety. They never repealed it. So, but now we get a ticket for 65 and a 55. Oh, give us some money. It's all about money.
It seems that, I mean, certainly over here in the U.S., I mean, you go back 100, I have a small business, outside of doing the show. And I couldn't believe all the different things I had to do and all the things I have to navigate, especially here in California. And I think of the, prior to 100 years ago, I don't know how true it is, but I saw a post somebody did, like, you can go fishing, you can go, start a business, you can go do this and that without any,
Anything, yeah.
oversight, things of that nature. And then now it's, hey, did you get the papal blessings from the state? And, um, I'm trying to figure out this, like, Goldilocks sweet spot zone, because, I recognize that you probably need to have a government to, be able to, carry out certain basic things. But at the same time, how do you keep it from continuing to encroach on personal sovereignty and such? And now it's gotten to a point where, it's crazy. And then you hear things about Palantir and these private, companies and such in bed with, government forces and, all, these technocrats, if you will.
Look, I lived in New Jersey. My father's a law partner told me, if you die here in New Jersey, tell your family drag the body across the river before they tell anybody. And New Jersey, you need a $500,000 license to be able to sell a beer. Down here in Florida, you can buy, wine and beer in the grocery store. Are these things for our safety, or is it just for their money? And that's basically what it is. That's the problem. Once government gets its hands on something, they don't give it back. And we're just the schmucks to turn upside down, shake us till they get every penny out of our pocket. That's about it. I was in Vancouver, and there was a real socialist politician, and I couldn't believe what came out of her mouth. She actually said, everything you earn belongs to the state. We decide how much you should keep. You're an economic slave. That's the way they look at you. How dare you think you're independent? It's crazy. But,
I was going to say, it sounds like sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I hear people talk about that it's like a neo-feudalism, if you will. Like I think, I don't know if it's Michael Hudson, the professor, he's mentioned a model called rentier, capitalism, if you will. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I haven't done a deep dive on it, but.
I've already looked at it. Look, capitalism came largely with the Black Plague. What it was that after Rome fell, people went into serfdom for safety because there was no government. Okay, so you went to some guy who had a castle. All right, I'll come plant your work your land. You protect me. Okay, that became serfdom. The Black Plague came, and about 50% of the population of Europe died. Now there's a shortage of labor. So they began paying wages. So serfdom died in Europe, basically in the 14th century. And so the wages started, and then the king go, oh, they're making money. I should get some of that, So then the taxes come. And Shakespeare's famous line, the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers. To put that in proper context, you were not allowed to have a lawyer. The lawyers were the government prosecutors. So when he's saying the first thing in that rebellion, the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers, it was the prosecutors, the king's lawyers, who were confiscating people's houses, things of this nature, for taxes. So that's what that quote actually meant. People go, oh, all the lawyers. No, prosecutors. Change the word. You weren't allowed to have a lawyer. Lawyers were only for the king.
You reminded me of some of these pernicious people over the years. I remember reading about this is totally off topic, but or related to this guy named Judge Jeffreys. I think this was like late 1600s, and how he would just similar arbitrarily like, yeah, well, you're going to get hanged. All right, done. Sign a
Oh,
death
yeah.
warrant or whatever. And just the arbitrariness of things. And yeah, think about probably a lot of the injustices. Again, I had this. I had John Waters on again, prominent Irishman, and I was prior to having him on, I was looking at like Cromwell's occupation of Ireland, some of the massacres over there, even for his time, that
Hmm.
were considered egregious. And boy, I feel like the Irish have really been taken advantage of. It just seems over the centuries, and yeah, it's history repeats.
Look, in
More or
our
less.
Constitution, um, it says it forbids indentured servitude. What was that? Um, you're talking about that judge. I think some of his quotes are, uh, "You stole an apple." Okay, that's it. That's a crime, and it would sentence you to 5 years in prison or 5 years. But as an indentured servant, they then sold you to a somebody in the United States. So the first people, slaves per se, were not black from Africa. They were criminals from London. And Abraham uh, or Ben Franklin he's got a famous quote. He said, "How would you like it if we took all our rattlesnakes, put them in the bag, and sent them to England?" So they would send you down here. You got a 5 year sentence. You got to work on some plantation. Your 5 years is up. Okay, you're free. Did anybody pay your way back? No. Um, some of the quotes of that judge saying, "We're relieving you of all your duties to your family, etc., and off you go." Because they would he would sentence you to 5 years and sell you as a slave. That's what indentured servitude was. When the revolution took place, that stopped. What happened? Then Australia became a penal colony. They sent them to Australia. Um, the black slaves were coming, the Dutch were selling them. They were capturing them in Africa, bringing over and selling them because the new labor, basically, from all the criminals stopped. Um,
So I was going to say it's also fascinating how many Africans were enslaved and sold amongst each other and sold to the
yeah.
Europeans, and how much of that is not like abundantly clear. And then also I think there's a book called, I think it's called White Gold. The slavery that existed even like early 1800s and such off. I think it's like Barbary Coast. Around that area, people getting usurped, and yeah, there's so much that's just glossed over, and
Well, that goes back to ancient times that the spoils of war. Um, Rome took out Carthage, okay, in the final war. I think it was like 50,000 inhabitants. They're all taken and sold into slavery. So slavery was legal uh, for basically the losers in war. So the Africans were selling blacks to the Dutch, and the Dutch couldn't legally buy them unless they were a um, lost in war. And that's why when they came to America, they couldn't enslave the natives. It was banned because they were not spoils of the war. So they had to bring the Africans over because they couldn't take the Indians.
Now, I don't know if I missed something, but was that predicated from a can't even speak, particular book or source? Where was that derived from?
Throughout history, I mean, as far as the spoils of war for most of your really, Roman history, etc. That's what they did to Carthage. Um, the uh, they pretty much did that all the way up through. Uh, the church was involved, came over, and was stopping anything like that in the 1500s. I mean, you can read all about that sort of stuff, but I mean that's primarily why they brought the blacks over. Um, Morally, they couldn't just take Indians and throw chains on them. You can only do that. The moral way was they had to be spoils of war.
I think it's interesting how the Spanish and Portuguese did that so differently. How they create their own caste system, and how vastly different Latin America became from Northern Europe, and
Mm-hmm.
and the nuances which has of course led to where it is presently.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting following all the ebbs and flows of how things actually developed. Um, but the spoils, slavery in Roman times, they were all basically a lot of Greeks were slaves, but um, they became teachers and household slaves and things of this nature. Um, Taught the children and they weren't like whipped and stuff like that. It was um, but they were slaves because they lost in war with Rome.
A lot of fascinating history. Martin, was there anything else you'd like to dispense? And then also, how can people, of course, learn more about you and get in touch with you?
Uh, Basically, you just go to armstrongeconomics.com. We keep it as an open source. You don't have to put in emails, or we don't sell advertising or anything like that. We try to keep it open. Um, we're not actually blocked. You can people can get us in China, Russia, everywhere. So we try to keep it neutral and um, as an open source for everybody in the world.
Well, I appreciate you doing what you do, and of course, taking the time out of your day to come on the show. It's always a pleasure, Martin, and looking forward to getting further updates from you on where we are in navigating this wonderful world.
Well, it's going to be interesting over the next 3 months. I think you're going to start seeing things percolate a little bit more.
Very well. Well, Martin, you take care. Have a great weekend, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
All right, take care. See you again.
Likewise. Quick ask: over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.